Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, May 18th in the year 2021, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday with Thom. Tuesday with Thom, of course, is brought to you by our partners, the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Best Girl customizes solutions to issues of leadership, access and inclusion, economic development, and communication. Best Girl creates the solution that fits your needs. I am coming to you live today from Birmingham, Alabama, my hometown. If it looks like I'm in a hotel room, that's because I am. And somebody asked me if that was by choice, and yes, it is, whatever that means. But we're looking forward to doing it from Birmingham today. Our roundtable guests, Barbara Wallace-Edwards and Michael Walker, are here. We always look forward to our conversations with them. And our special G-list guest is the ordained Methodist preacher, the Reverend Michael Doby. Michael Doby is a retired law enforcement executive with over 40 years experience in law enforcement. Today, we will discuss policing with a man who has been there. Let's see, sports news. Bob Baffert is not going to have a horse run in the third leg of the Triple Crown. The investigation is still ongoing into the Kentucky Derby winner, and they've decided that Mr. Baffert won't be able to run a horse in the third leg of the crown. Let's see, in the NBA Hall of Fame, Tim Duncan is always one of my favorites. Kevin Garnett and Kobe Bryant were inducted into the NBA Hall of Fame this past week. Michael Jordan introduced Kobe Bryant. His wife did the acceptance speech, and it was absolutely wonderful, very meaningful, and touching. Politics and sports have often crossed paths, and when they do, it sometimes can be contentious. A very good ESPN E60 I got to catch on Sunday morning. Sunday morning is regarding the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association's team, the Atlanta Dream, and its former owner. I remember that the players had some issue against the owner, and at that time, Kelly Loeffler, who was a senator, but I didn't realize to what extent until I saw this film. According to an article in the New York Times, the owner, Loeffler's relationship with the team she owned was not always contentious. She's a former high school player. She would sit courtside at games. She would invite players to her games, to her home after the game. Under Loeffler, the team did things like celebrate LGBTQ Pride Nights. They honored Stacey Abrams, the former Black Democratic candidate for governor. But according to the film and the New York Times, apparently the climate changed when the governor of Georgia, Governor Kemp, appointed Loeffler to a vacant U.S. Senate seat. Loeffler called herself then the most conservative person in Congress and tied herself to former President Donald Trump, adopting and mimicking much of his incendiary language. She strongly objected to the Black Lives Matter tribute T-shirts that the women wore in warm-ups. In response, the Dream players refused to say her name, helped to raise money for her opponent, the Reverend Raphael Warnock, and they campaigned for him. They wore T-shirts urging people to vote for Warnock and not vote for the owner. Loeffler ended up losing that election by 2 percentage points. In the film, the young women, the team is 80% Black, closely identified with the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. They were very articulate and thoughtful regarding their views and could see themselves in those murders. The new owners are real estate executives, Atlanta real estate executives, but they also include one of the Dream's former players, Renee Montgomery. We wish them well, we wish the team well, and we wish the ex-Senator Loeffler well. So let's move to our regular roundtable guests and introduce Barbara Wallace-Edwards and Michael Walker. Barbara Wallace-Edwards is a Mobile, Alabama native, currently living in Birmingham. Barbara, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Thom. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you today?
I am doing well. Well, your favorite company was in the news yesterday. There's some kind of merger they're going to do with Discovery or something like that. I just saw the headline, AT&T. They were in the news yesterday, and you still don't have an internet service that can work.
My internet speed is still very, 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 very slow. So I'm still, working remotely from another location, not at home as I prefer. So yeah, AT&T just cannot get my issues resolved. I even went out and bought a new laptop thinking that would possibly help. And so far, that's still not helping a whole lot. I'm going to be back on the phone with them again today. We'll try it again.
And you won't be discussing the merger, I assume.
No, I won't be discussing the merger with them, asking how they're staying in business the way they're treating their customers right now. So yeah, that's an issue.
What else is happening in your world?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the NBA Hall of Fame. I watched that presentation, and Vanessa Bryant did a remarkable job in her speech and honoring Kobe, and it was so emotional. Yeah, that just really touched my heart. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. There were a couple of other people that were inducted along with them. Tamika Catchings, who played at Tennessee and with Indiana Fever. She was also inducted, and the former coach at Kentucky, Sutton, was also in that class. Okay. Yes, yeah. So as everyone knows, this was the 2020 class. So it was the last year's show was not. They did not hold the induction ceremonies due to the pandemic. So there will be another induction in September for the 2021 class. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It was very, very touching and very meaningful, and Duncan was always one of my favorite players, and the bad boy Garnett.
Yes,
they were two of my favorites. So it was
great class.
And the E60 thing with the Atlanta Fever was really good.
Yes,
I thought it was good. It's unfortunate that it happened the way it happened, but that's what happens in politics. You're forced to choose sides.
Yes, and it's sad.
And there's no middle ground.
Right.
So I don't know. I was proud of those young ladies. How they handled themselves, how they spoke. They didn't speak with any animosity or anything. They just said, "This is where we stand, and we'll go out and do what we can do." And they did an incredible job.
Yes, they did
for the senator. Okay, let's see. Let's get Michael Walker in here. Michael Walker is from Atlanta, Georgia. I assume he's in Atlanta, Georgia today. He's president of the Walker Agency of Full Service Insurance Brokerage. Michael, how are you this morning, and what's happening in your world?
Well, good morning, Tom. Good morning, Barbara. I am doing well today. I just wanted to say briefly, it's interesting you brought up former Georgia Senator Kelly Loeffler. I saw her yesterday.
Did you?
Yes, I did, and had an opportunity to speak with her a little bit. You know, she has started a grassroots campaign to register more Republicans, something similar to what Stacey Abrams did to turn out the vote on the Democratic side, and that's what she's doing. And you made the comment about the story on the Atlanta Dream. Well, by the mere fact that I'm here in Atlanta and involved in the political arena, I was very close to that. And as a matter of fact, when she was running for re-election, I had an opportunity to talk to Senator Kelly Loeffler. And I advised her to stay away from that issue of Black Lives Matter and telling. And the real turning point in that was when she wrote a letter to the WNBA commissioner criticizing the freedom of WNBA players to wear shirts that said Black Lives Matter. She basically said that they shouldn't be allowed to do that. You know, they should just focus on playing basketball and stay out of politics. And I was at a luncheon and I advised her that that was a argument she couldn't win, and that she probably needs to stay away from it from a lot of different reasons, and I won't go into them now. But needless to say, she didn't follow my advice, and it is what it is. I asked her yesterday, I said, well, that seat is coming back up. What are your intentions? She said, I'm not running. That's what she told me yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You know, that shut up and dribble thing just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't
anymore. And I guess I've never understood. Well, I do understand it in some way. It doesn't make sense, but why people feel professional athletes and people who are in the limelight, actors or what have you, why they shouldn't have opinions about things that govern their lives.
Right.
But I think she got caught up in the, and you know it much better than I do, Michael, but I think she got caught up in she was forced to choose a side. And
Sure.
And I don't know if in politics you cannot choose a side if you don't believe in it. But again, from my standpoint, I don't know the lady, you know her, but we wish her well.
Yeah, well, the only thing I say about your comment about why people think that professional athletes don't have a say or a right to say in the words of politics, I beg to differ with you on that from the standpoint if Tom Brady says it, it's okay. Okay.
I should say some athlete.
There you go. All right. Okay. I'll move along and get back into the thing that I do, but I couldn't let that slide, Tom.
But did Tom Brady say that while he was criticizing Michael Jordan? I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, he was criticizing Michael Jordan and a couple other people. No, LeBron James. So he was talking out of both sides of his mouth, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, like I said, Brady can.
Brady can talk out of both sides.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brady can. Nobody else can.
Okay.
Tom, let's talk a little bit about healthcare. A couple things to note. Last Thursday, there was a bipartisan bill that was brought before Congress, and they're looking at it. And what it's about is reforming Medicare Advantage and healthcare prior authorization. You may recall that when you go to a doctor or have to have a procedure, sometimes they ask you to check with your health insurance provider to make sure that it will be authorized or be paid for. Well, there's turning out to be, and there's both sides of the coin, but there are people that are saying that can be misused because what they're trying to do is contain costs and make sure that tests and things that are performed are medically necessary for the end objective. And a study from the Human Services Office of Inspector General found that 75% of original claims that were denied were approved upon appeal. And then they later found out that only 1% of denied claims recently had been appealed. And that, is both sides of the issue. One is doctors need to be able to do what they can do for a patient without being encumbered. Then on the other side, because of the exorbitant costs of healthcare, that's why the insurance companies are tasked with controlling costs and keeping insurance premiums down. So they're trying to find a middle ground on this. So you'll see a lot more of that coming. I am involved with it because I do Medicare Advantage, and I have issues sometimes where some of my clients go to a doctor, have a procedure done, and then they call me and say they denied my claim. And I have to get involved and work through the nuances of getting it approved and helping them to get that reversed. But they're going to try to address that. And one other thing that's going to be coming up is transparency. We in the industry has been working on that. And what we're talking about is the costs. You may recall that you go to the hospital or something and you get an aspirin and it costs $100 for one aspirin. And all those exorbitant costs. Well, what this transparency is about is that by 2023, healthcare providers will have to begin posting their negotiated prices in a consumer-friendly format that's easily understood. So that when you go to a hospital to have a procedure done, you should be able to look at it in a user-friendly manner. And the reason why I emphasize is that they have all these different metrics and analyticals and things like that where they hide the costs. And you really don't know what the cost is. You don't even know what you're looking at to begin, because it's in a foreign language, so to speak. So they are saying that by 2023, they are going to enforce the fact that health providers have to provide their costs in a manner in which John Q. Public can look at it and determine if that's where they want to go. Another thing that they found is that there's no uniformity across the board. So in other words, you can go to one hospital and this procedure will cost you $5,000. This other hospital will charge you $3,000. It's the same procedure.
Same thing.
So there's going to be more things coming out about that.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. That's great. I was laughing because I go get a shot in my knee every 6 months. And the shot, one shot, is $2,000. And it doesn't help. You know, it doesn't work. That's the funny
sad part.
If it was $2,000 and it worked, okay,
Right.
there'd be some argument for it. But okay, Barbara, you got anything else?
I just wanted to say congratulations to all of the graduates out there. I don't know if you all know any graduates, high school, college graduates, but there have been tons of graduations these last couple of weeks. So get a personal shout out to all of the 2021 graduates this year.
All right. Michael, you got anything else for us?
Well, no, we just have to keep moving on, you know, and think about the future. At least we're getting COVID under control, and that's a good thing. But as I mentioned to you guys several months back, there was going to become an issue with mandating vaccinations and mandating mask wearing. And now we have conflicting things. Like, for instance, CVS is not going to require you to have a mask when you come in, but Walgreens will.
Yeah.
So we're going to keep doing that. Home Depot requires one, but Costco doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Say I wear mine.
I will wear mine until the end.
and,
So, so it doesn't matter.
You know, I have both shots, and I was recently tested a couple of times because I worked a job, an acting job, and I had to be tested. And I was negative, but I don't know. I'm not going to get involved in the argument over it. I'm just going to keep wearing my mask until such time. But you said something about the future, and you reminded me of a quote about Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra said, "The future ain't what it used to be."
So true.
Michael, Barbara, you guys got anything else for us?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was great. Let's go to our message from Best Girl.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly-Gossam, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
Well, let's go to the G list. The G list where everybody is a star. You remember Hollywood has the A list, and here on Tuesdays with Thom, we have the G list. And our G list guest today is the Reverend Michael Doby. Michael Doby is a Episcopal Methodist preacher. I'm sorry, an ordained Methodist preacher. And he's also a retired law enforcement executive with over 40 years experience. And so we get to hear somebody talk about law enforcement who's from law enforcement. Mr. Doby, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you and the panel doing? I enjoy the show, and I'm glad to be a part of it this morning. I want to thank you for this opportunity to be in the public eye once again.
We appreciate you being here. So let's just start at the beginning. Tell me how you got into police work and what motivated that.
Well, the thing is that at the time I was a student at Florida A&M University on that hill in Tallahassee, Florida. That's for all you HBCU lovers and some haters. But with that being said, I got an opportunity to actually begin my law enforcement career by just a shot from one of my professors that I had interned for, and he reached out and asked me to put in for the job. He thought I would be a great candidate for it. And at the time that I began law enforcement, I went to a little place called Sarasota, Florida, and and uh, unbeknownst to me, before I got there, the city at the time was currently under some pressure to hire minorities, and so I felt like a draft pick. They flew me down. They tested me. They gave me an offer. They flew me back home. They followed up, and the rest of that beginning is history. I mean, I actually joined it because it seemed to be exciting. It seemed to be an opportunity to get out and really do something that was alive. But as I got older and wiser, and through my mother's prayers, um, I began to understand that my place within law enforcement as a whole meant more than just being excited about the job. It meant that my representation was there for a lot of reasons, so that my community saw someone that looked like them, that that then gave me a responsibility to not only treat everyone fair, but to be particularly mindful of what is going on within the community of color. And so I I think that over time and over grace, uh, I've I've grown to understand now as I look back for of this journey of life. And I guess that actually is what happens when you're my age. You start looking back, and of course, hindsight is 2020, and you see quite clearly the path that God had laid out for me, and I'm just very thankful about that.
Well, let's flash forward,
Hmm.
um, and we're in a, I guess, a controversial time in terms of policing.
Yes, we
Can
are.
you just give me your thoughts on where we are and some of the controversies that have occurred?
Well, the thing about it is, and of course, from friends and relatives um, around the country, I always get involved and entangled in discussions of this nature. But I will say this: that my feel of it all, because I lived it for the majority of my adult life, is that that we are seeing uh, the profession through a jaundiced eye because of
Hmm.
what is being portrayed, sometimes instantaneously, in the media. Now, that's a double-edged sword, because really, that I'm not saying that the freedom of that act of publishing something that you see the way you see it is wrong. That's a freedom of press. Um, but I will say that we should not judge the profession itself by a couple of bad actors, and I really do mean that. Because if you think about it, you're probably talking about, even if you encapsulate it, starting with, I'll give you a name that people have even forgotten about, McDuffie in Miami. If you go all the way up to where we are with George Floyd, and you counted the number of bad actors against the number of folk that go out and do the job every day responsibly and correctly, you're probably talking about less than 1% of the entire law enforcement community within the contiguous United States, not even counting Hawaii, Alaska, and our counterparts in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, in specifically your career,
Hmm.
can you tell me what a high point was, and then counteract that with what was a low point?
Well, the high point, of course, always is my promotions. I,
And
I
you
mean,
ended up being a major, is that correct?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Being a part of a senior management at one of what would be considered a major sheriff's office in the country, the Orange County Sheriff's Office here in Orlando, Florida. And the opportunity to, through those ranks, to influence lives, both of the people who work with me and the people who were lived within the communities that we served, was very, very uplifting. And it was kind of like when I retired, I said that I won't miss the circus, but I'm going to miss the clowns. In other words, all of us that were in that group of clowns within the circus, being the best actors that we could under the big tent of law enforcement, those relationships meant a whole lot to me, and they still do. And those things was very, very enlightening now and uplifting. But the lowest point in my career, I will have to say, and I'm even now trying to hold back my total emotion about the event is that I've had friends die in the line of duty. I've had people that I've known in the line of duty that I didn't really work with them, but we were law enforcement counterparts, maybe at another agency or maybe in another division. And I thought that that I would end my career with not ever being affected by an in-line of duty death by somebody who directly worked for me. And on a tragic day in January, we not only lost an Orlando police officer that was murdered by execution, but one of the responding officers, law enforcement, was a deputy on a motorcycle that worked for me, and his name was Norman Lewis. And at that point, it seemed like I just could not dodge that bullet. I never had to shoot and kill anyone in the line of duty. As a matter of fact, I did my entire career without ever having to shoot anyone. But with that being said, I thought that I could get by without having to go to the memorial service and see and have to be a part of it. See that it's all funerals and those type of things are kind of optional when you're not a part of the family. You can go and grieve and kind of find your place to hide, but when you're responsible for that life and the family thereof, and you have to be a part of that family now and grieve with the entire group, and that was the low point in my life, my professional life.
Community policing. I live in a small community in Northwest Florida, and we have a police chief. It's been there a couple of years, and he's really doing a fantastic job. But he is very much into community policing from the standpoint of officers are visible in the community. I'm riding my bicycle. They wave at me as they go by, and I wave
with all five fingers.
With all five fingers. They don't give me the one finger salute. They don't. And it's really I guess growing up, and I've made this statement before, growing up, didn't feel like the police officers that policed our community were there to protect and serve us. Where I am now, they're there to protect and serve us. And it's a different feeling. You get that feeling. What's your feeling about community policing?
Well, well, let me say it this way. In that 40-year career, I was assigned to a part of that division 4 times. Once as a worker, then back as a supervisor, then back as a manager, and then back as a division head. So I really understand not only the methodology behind it. I was a part of the grassroots back in the late '80s that began that whole genre of community policing and the involvement of interacting with the public on a positive note. If you think about it, it is designed almost like when you think about fellowshipping after church, or how you get your congregation to grow is by actually interacting with them away from just the actual church event, so that people actually get to know people. And that's what community policing actually does. And when it's done right, it is very effective, very, very effective. And that is a component that within the best practices of law enforcement has to be a stable at any organization. As a matter of fact, when we look around the country at some of these horrible events, you will probably see that there is not an accountable mandate to community policing within those departments.
And I'm going to go to Michael and Barbara. I want to just ask, how do you feel about where I live? The police don't have to live in the community, and I understand that because they say the community, the housing is expensive, and so on and so forth. How do you feel about that? Should police live in the communities that they police?
Yes and no. It's kind of a mixed bag, because the one thing about it is, even if you have them, or you have that be a mandate to live within the community, would that actually change their heart? Because the one thing about it is that if you the whole picture of policing needs to be examined from a couple of different viewpoints, different vantage points, in order to make this perfect law enforcement officer that we all want. And simply by making them relocate, that really doesn't matter. It's a very good component, because the one thing about it is that you're not gonna let your dog crap on your neighbor's lawn and not pick it up, because you got to look him in the face. And so that is one great thing about it. But I would say that because of the current environment, that's not a end all to have them be a part of the community, because it's much more involved with hiring, training, accountability, and some ideas on best practices that they also have to be instilled, and that be a component of it.
Okay. Well, let's go to Michael and Barbara and get some questions from them. Barbara, you're up.
Yes. Good morning, Michael. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, Barbara.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I do have a question for you. Recently, New York State Senator Brian Benjamin sponsored a proposed bill that states that police officers who were either fired or forced to resign because of disciplinary reasons may not be able to work as officers in other jurisdictions in the state of New York.
Right.
I feel like that's something that should be applicable nationwide. What are your thoughts on that? And do you feel that will help resolve some of the issues we may have been facing recently?
Yes, but this is one of the things, and I'm glad you asked that question, because one of the clearer pictures that we're faced as a nation and as voters is states' rights. See, that the states' rights are the one thing, and please don't label me as an anarchist, and don't don't put me in the next radical group that's on the internet. But states' rights, they dictate who is hired and who is fired by the government, even right on down to the people who do agricultural work for the government. So when you talk about what is done within a state, well, the one thing about it is, even in the state of Florida, that is a regulation that's withheld by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. That if what we say, the moniker for it is their ticket. If they pull their ticket, they actually put their retirement is in jeopardy, and their future law enforcement presence anywhere in the state is either denied or in jeopardy. But each state has different levels that to meet the threshold for denial, and that's where the problem is. I don't think that any state wants to keep hiring bad cops. So I don't think that that's their intent. And so through those loopholes, they're able to the enemy, which is the bad cop, is able to hide and then become a part of an agency somewhere else. And that problem, that's going to be a bigger problem. And I think that there's some House and Senate bills that like the most recent one in George Floyd's name, that has a blanket solution for that, but trying to get it through and trying to get it passed and then trying to have it have each state held accountable is where our next step is going to be.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Michael, you got your question?
Yes.
Oh,
Good morning.
I'm sorry. The two Michaels on here today. So.
I know, because I was going to say, yeah, I got a question for him. No, I was only kidding.
Well, you can ask a question. My topic I'd like to get your perspective on is the qualified immunity and officers being protected by qualified immunity. Now, discussion about removing that shield. What's your perspective on qualified immunity for police officers?
Well, I can only from this standpoint, because I hear that, and I understand that there is legislation that's on the books for that, but the culture that I was raised up in, qualified immunity never played a part. Part of my 40-year career is that that I was assigned to the disciplinary process, and I actually reviewed files, held people accountable to policy, terminated people that were doing not even egregious as the cause of death to someone, but I'm talking about just blatant policy violations. And there was no qualified immunity from the agency standpoint that protected them from our rules and regulations. But once again, we go to states' rights and what is actually being put on the table that stops them from holding someone accountable, even though it is obvious that they have broken the law. And so the qualified immunity issue, I feel that that there really was no need for it, because if you truly made a mistake, then it would be seen as a mistake. I think a lot of times what happens is when people lie about a mistake, even if it was a general one, then it now has malice. It's no longer a mistake because you're lying about it. And if you've done something wrong, then you admit it, then like the Canadian police have a saying: you mess up, then you dress up. No, you mess up, fess up, then dress up. Period. And if you live by that code, then you will survive most of your mistakes. But if it has intent behind it, then why would you need to have, then immunity plays a part in it. But as me personally, I would just say that I think that it needs to be removed wherever it is, because it you don't need to have a veil if you're telling the truth. It was almost like when we implemented at our agency body worn cameras. Of course, the rank and file had a problem with it, but and I walked among my folks. I was one of those managers that managed by walking around. So I went from deputy all the way up to the captain that was next to me, that they saw me at least once a week. And so when the deputies would approach me, I wouldn't send them back to their captain or chain of command. I would look them right in the face and go, well, what have you got to hide? Well, nothing. I go, well, okay, then keep in mind that the camera's already on when you're in public anyway. So why don't you have a camera from your viewpoint, and that way your side of the story is told. And actually when we implemented body worn cameras, you could actually see the complaints go down because everybody knew that they were being viewed. And so I think that's, and I know I kind of took us down a rabbit hole with from qualified immunity, but it's wrapped around that same environment that if you're telling the truth and you're doing the right thing, then it doesn't matter. So why would you need a blanket to cover you because of you've done something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yes, 100%. I agree with that.
Yes.
Continuing down that vein and
Mm-hmm.
of reforming police, and
Mm-hmm.
note, I did not say defund. I'm
Reforming.
funding police.
Mm-hmm.
However, I am in favor of reform, and I think it's needed.
It is.
One of the ideas that's being looked at, and even in certain areas where there's a couple here in Georgia, they're teaching police officers how to disarm and use jujitsu and some other stuff like that. That's one area. But the other area that piques my interest is where they're looking in social workers or psychologists to team with officers when they go out on certain calls, and particularly calls that involve mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask your perspective on that. And just from my observance, I often wonder, why is it when it's a person of color, whether it's Hispanic, African American, whatever, that has a mental illness that may be walking down the street nude without any clothes on, why is he a threat and he has to be killed? But if it's a person that has a mental illness, they're taken in without incident.
Well, once again, states' rights always rule when we start talking about individual police departments to begin with, or agencies. I'd like to address the first part of the question, where the reforming will team up with social workers and people who have expertise in handling mental illness. Because I think that one of the things is that, especially in reforming policing, that's an area that needs to be looked at very carefully. And the one thing about all of this is that it takes money to get this done. And that's where the real problem lies. Because see, when you want to cut back on taxes or funding to agencies, then they have to put out a product that's substandard for what your request is. But you still need them. And so whether it's social workers, whether it's training, whether it's accountability factors, whether it's hiring practices, all those things are encapsulated together, not just isolated. Because the one thing about it is the incident or an incident that you see in your mind is only the problem that coexist. You're only looking at the tip of the iceberg of how you got to the point where you had to kill some mentally ill person. But under that is so many other causations that have to be corralled, that if we truly sit down to the table and then say these are the steps that we have to do, then we would have better law enforcement. We'd have better community relations. We would have places where folk would feel safe, even if no matter where they were, if they saw a uniformed police officer. But the other thing is, once again, each one of those events where a person of color is killed, it's highlighted because of our sensitivity of recent events. And hear me out. I'm not trying to say that they're right in doing it. I'm just saying if we look at each one case by case, we have to understand what went wrong. Was the officer at fault, or was the system at fault, or were both of them at fault? And then we can then determine what we need to do to rectify that. If it's his judgment that he killed him, then we can hold him accountable. But if you put him in a predicament where he had no other choice, then now we have to try to figure out what the system can do before we try to deal with his behavior. And so it's a lot more complicated than that. And I know what you're saying, because once again, I feel it just like you do. I'm not separated from the fact that I'm African American, and it could happen to me too. So I always want to say that, well, why is that? And I want us to one day get to the point where we can say that was proper judgment, and that's not a thought that comes across our mind. Was it racially motivated or not? And that's a scary thought right now for all of us. Yes.
Let me. That's great. Thank you.
Yes.
One quick thing. Tell us about Noble.
Thank you so much. I was hoping we would get to that. because as your viewership, and Thom, you already have my contact information. So what I'd like to tell you is that Noble does have a program that's called The Law in Your Community. And it initially was, and even if you look at the national website, it is actually said from 13 to 18 years old is our target audience, and it still is. But the actual platform that we use in this interactive training scenario for the public is it's now adjusted for adult content. It always has been, and so we will do it in any group. And what it is it's an explanation, scenario based, where you see interaction with police, and what are your expectations as members of the public, and what is expected of you as the members of the public, but also what you should expect as a response from the officer or deputy or law enforcement officer that you're interacting with. And once we lay these scenarios out, we then have an interactive session where it's very unique, where we put members of the audience in the place of the police, and then we explain the exchange. And then once you put on someone else's shoes, once you walk in someone else's shoes, then we have an understanding of just what I talked about earlier, where we look on a case by case basis instead of a blanket a blanket explanation for behavior. And then that becomes a veil between you and the person you're dealing with, because we still, whether you realize it or not, there is a human being inside that uniform. And so if we can get to see one another's humanity, I think we will have a clearer understanding of what we should be doing to bring peace to our communities.
Let me say that Noble is the National Organization of Black Law Executives. And you currently sit as the president of the Central Florida chapter. So you're retired, but you're involved.
Yes.
And basically, this is a community organization as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And the national organization stance is that we see ourselves, the organization itself, we see ourselves as a conscience of law enforcement. So our president has released tons of information and stances from our organization on any stance of social justice, and when it's done right, we also applaud it. We are also subject matter experts that go to Congress and meet with representatives and senators to make sure that that from the law enforcement side, just pretty much like I'm doing here with y'all, you hear our side of it, and we try to explain how it will work and how it should be implemented, both in the public and in law enforcement arenas.
All right. Okay, Michael, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it. Let me move on so we can get to our closing commentary, or as I see it. And speaking of Yogi Berra, was somebody speaking of Yogi Berra earlier? I don't remember. Anyway, Yogi Berra was a great baseball player, and he won 13 championships with the New York Yankees. But Yogi Berra is more famous for what he said than for how he played. And so I've got, and whenever he would say something such as nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded, there was always some backward logic to what he said. And so I've got some Yogi-isms for us this morning before we leave you, and I'd like to give you. Yogi said, you can observe a lot by just watching. Yogi also said it ain't over till it's over. The future ain't what it used to be. I love this one. I usually take a 2-hour nap from 1 to 4. 2-hour nap from 1 to 4. 90% of the game is half mental. And Yogi said, I never said most of the things I said. But my favorite is Yogi gave this advice to a stranded friend who was trying to find his house. And Yogi told him, said, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. And the guy said, what? What? Say that again. He says, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. Now, if you think about that, this has a life implication as well, because when you come to decisions that have to be made, sometimes you just have to make them, whether you know the answer down the road or not. So I had a couple of friends call me up and ask me for some life-changing advice. And knowing the friends the way I knew them, I knew they had to make up their own man. And so without hesitancy, I quoted Yogi. I said, hey, when you come to the fork in the road, take it. They laughed. They both laughed. They're laughing even louder now, but I'll guarantee you when they come to the fork in the road, they will take it. And that's our show for today. It's been great. We want to thank Michael Doby for his insight into policing. I think we learned some things, and hopefully we will have a chance to talk with him again in the future. I want to thank Michael, thank Barbara. Our guest list for next week is someone who knows something about coming to the fork in the road and taking it, and that's business consultant Dawn Novi. Dawn is the recent chair of ABWA, the American Business Women's Association. We look forward to having her. I want to thank our sponsor, Best Girl. If you're interested in having your business be a sponsor of the show, get in touch with us. You know somebody who you think would be a great guest on the show, please refer them to us at either Thom@bestgirl.com or Emily@bestgirl.com. I want to thank Emily Hedrick, the communicator, our producer. Thank Sean Jones, the organizer. Remember to enjoy yourself, make every day count, stay safe, and peace.